Hello, this is a seasonal tale for the Easter holidays, and it's an Irish tale from Galway, where I was on holiday myself the other year. I hope you enjoy it. This is the tale of Daniel and the Pooka. There was, several hundred years ago, a young man by the name of Daniel, who lived in Galway and made his living, such as it was, a very small living, by playing the pipes. Well, I say he played the pipes, and the reason it was a small living was because he could only play one song upon the pipes. He could play the Black Piper. He went from pub to pub to pub, from fair to house to church to anywhere that would have him, and he played that one song again and again and again and again. And if you're wondering why he had never learned a second, a third, a fourth song, as most musicians do, they learn an entire list of songs, it's because Daniel was, to put it politely, a simple-minded creature, a gentle soul, naive and innocent, with very few skills in the world, and such skills as he did possess, he obsessed over, he honed in as well as he could on that one blessed tune. And half the time, people who gave him money to go away and stop playing, for they were sick to death of hearing it. But it was Easter. He had spent the morning in church, the afternoon tending the garden and growing the vegetables in his mother's house, and now he decided to go into town and to ply his musical trade and try and earn a few coins to buy some food to go up on the table the following day. And he had got as far as the bridge into town, when he saw in the twilight coming towards him on the other side of the bridge a figure. And it was an odd moving figure, a lolloping figure. It sort of bounced a little, leapt a little as it came towards him, hopping, you might say. And as he got closer and closer and closer, Daniel realised how remarkably tall this figure was, and part of the tallness of the figure was the two huge great ears lolloping on the top of its head. For this was a brown hare of the most enormous proportions. In fact, Daniel had to look up into its great brown eyes to talk to it. Not only was it of enormous proportions, but it was a very well-dressed hare, for it was adorned with a waistcoat and a pocket watch. And the hare stopped and spoke to him and said, "You are Daniel the Piper." And Daniel nodded quietly, mutely, well, as you would do if you were confronted by a giant talking hare. "Play for me," said the hare. And Daniel, shaking and shivering, took his pipes and began to play that one song, the Black Piper. And as you might imagine, of someone who had played that one song 500 times over, he played it remarkably well. And at the end, the Pooka said, "Everything I have heard tell of you is perfectly true. You are undoubtedly the best piper in the whole of Ireland. Therefore, I have no hesitation in booking you, in hiring you to come and play on the top of Knockhonia, where the Queen of the Fairies herself, Onya, is to host a banquet for all of the fairy folk of Ireland. I am invited, and now you are invited." But Daniel said, I only know one song. I can play that, but no other." "Do not worry," said the Pooka, "for I had heard tell this of you as well. On the way from here to Knockhonia, I will teach you all of the other tunes that you need to know. But it will take days and days and days to get to Knockhonia from here. I can't walk that far. I'll have holes in my boots by the time we get there," said the lad. "Do not worry, for you can travel upon my back." And at that, the great hare went down upon all fours and bid Daniel to climb upon his back. And as soon as the lad was on, he told Daniel to grab hold of his ears for safety. And off they raced at a phenomenal speed across the land like lightning. Up and up and up they went, higher and higher into the air, until they were flying through clouds and mist, seeing the stars closer than Daniel had ever seen them in his entire life. And within what seemed scarcely more than an hour, they were alighting on top of Knockhonia itself. And Daniel had never been so high in the entirety of his life. And as they landed, there was a great, huge fortress built in the ancient style on the top of the mountain. And around this fortress were flares and burning lights. Leading the way in, the Pooka beckoned him to follow. The two fairy guards opened the enormous doors of the fortress. Inside they went to a hall filled with noise and chatter and the wonderful aromas of cooking meats and the flowing sounds of beer and mead and wine. And all of these figures dressed in finery turned to look at the latest arrivals. And Daniel was shaking and shivering to see them all. For some of them looked human, but some of them were more like horses, and some were more like goats, and some were more like foxes, and some were more like hares, much like the Pooka that had brought him in, and some like birds, and some like the creatures of the sea, and some defied imagination and description. Some seemed half plant and half human and half something else again, for none of them could add up. The Pooka stood proudly and brought Daniel to the centre of the great hall, and there in an enormous throne was Anya herself, the queen of the fairies, and alas, but I am forbidden from describing her, for unless you yourself are a fairy, you are not allowed to know what the queen of the fairies looks like. But Daniel was impressed, and he said to the Pooka, "But in the ride over here, you said you were going to teach me music. Like, you haven't taught me anything." "Do not worry," said the Pooka. "Just play the one you know." And shivering and shaking and wondering what would happen when the audience realised he only knew one tune, Daniel began to play the tune he knew so well, and it was beautiful. The audiences fell silent and they listened from beginning to end, and at the end they clapped with such rapturous applause that Daniel was quite bolstered, for the humans of Galway had failed to appreciate his talents all these many years he had been playing for them. And they called out, "Play this one, play that one." And all Daniel needed to do, he found, was to put the pipe to his lips and begin to blow, and the airs seemed to play themselves. Knowledge seemed to flow into his head from who knows where. And he played and he played and he played song after song after song after song. And each time there was a rapture of applause at the end of it. And they brought him food and they brought him drink. And by the end of the evening he was 16 sheets to the wind. And the Pooka said, "You have done well." And the Queen, Anya herself, said, "You, fine piper, must be paid." And every single fairy in that hall stood and took a coin from their pouch and chucked it at young Daniel. And he gathered them up and filled a great sack that he was provided with all of these coins, 100 weight of them, and hefted it over his shoulder. And the great hare said, "We must away. Be upon my back, and I will return you to Galway." And he climbed upon the great hare's back, took hold of those enormous ears, and off they went. Across the mountain, down and down and down, faster and faster and faster. A great streak of lightning across the land until they arrived back at the very bridge where he had first met the Pooka, and there the creature landed upon all fours. Daniel dismounted, and the hare stood up upon his toes again and said, "We will not meet again, Daniel, in this lifetime, but you have done well. Enjoy your reward." And with that, the Pooka lolloped away into the darkness, for it was the wee small hours of the night by now. And Daniel did not ever see him again, but he raced home to his mother, who was besides herself with worry as to where he had gone. And he said, Mother, the most amazing thing happened to me. Fairies and hares and things that look like foxes and things that look like owls and things that look like the deer of the forest and things that look like wolves. At the top of Knockhonia, on and on and on he went. And his mother knew he was a simple-minded soul, and she tried to calm him. I said, "Yes, dear, yes. All well and good, but where have you been, and what is that sack you're dragging with you?" And he opened the sack, and there was an absolute fortune in gold coin, and she was utterly amazed. Have you robbed a bank? How came you by all of this?" And he told her again, more calmly this time, how he'd played music, song after song after song. And his audience had been so appreciative, they'd showered him with gold. And she said, but son, you only know one tune. Ah, mother, I know many now. And he took up his pipes and he began to play one after another, after another, after another. 100 different songs. And his mother listened with tears pouring down her face, for not only had he suddenly found his wits after a lifetime without them, but the music was beautiful to behold. And the neighbours were awoken by the sound of the playing, but rather than being irate to be awoken in the middle of the night, they were enchanted by the beauty of the music too, and they turned up in their nightgowns and their dressing gowns to peer through the window, to come in at the door, to sit and listen, awed at this half-witted neighbour they'd known all of their lives, who had suddenly acquired this amazing set of talents. And as the dawn rose in the east and the light fell into the house, it landed on the sack of gold coins. And the music died away and stopped as they watched coin after coin after coin, shifting and turning and changing and becoming dried leaves, until there was nothing but a sack of dried leaves. For, as any fool could tell you, half-witted or even quarter-witted, fairy money does not last beyond the dawn. But the music lasted, for it had stayed in that young man's head. And from that day until his death in great old age, he was the greatest piper that Galway had ever known. And he earned enough money to fill that sack 20 times over during the course of his lifetime. And this was real money, not fairy money. He was able to keep his mother in grand style until she died of old age, and himself in even grander style until he died of old age on an Easter day 80 years later. Thank you.